The Dark Knight.
A classic criminal.
And I'm gonna give it.
Perhaps you should read the first.
What made the Joker one of the greatest villains in movie history? Why is The Dark Knight 2008 still called one of the best superhero movies ever made? Stay till the end because on Revise Walla, we are breaking down the movie story, hidden facts, and behind the scenes secrets you probably never knew. The Dark Knight is a 2008 superhero movie directed by Christopher Nolan, who wrote the script with his brother Jonathan Nolan. The movie is based on DC Comics' famous hero Batman. It's the sequel to Batman Begins 2005 and the second movie in the Dark Knight trilogy. The story follows Batman Gotham City Police Lieutenant James Gordon and District Attorney Harvey Dent as they team up to take down the city's powerful crime bosses. But everything falls apart when a dangerous criminal called the Joker shows up. The Joker is a crazy mastermind who wants to spread fear and chaos across Gotham while pushing Batman to his limits to see how far he'll go to protect the people he cares about. The movie features an incredible cast, including Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Heath Ledger, Gary Oldman, Aaron Eckhart, Maggie Gyllenhaal, and Morgan Freeman. After the huge success of Batman Begins, Warner Bros. Pictures quickly decided to move forward with another Batman movie. Christopher Nolan and Batman Begins writer David S. Goyer came up with the main story ideas, making Harvey Dent one of the most important characters caught in the middle of Batman's fight against the Joker. While writing the script, Christopher and Jonathan Nolan took inspiration from classic Batman comic books from the 1980s, along with famous crime drama movies. They wanted this sequel to feel even more realistic while keeping the serious tone that made Batman Begins so popular. Filming took place between April and November 2007 with a budget of about $185 million. dollars. Most of the movie was shot in Chicago, Hong Kong, and on movie sets built in England. The Dark Knight also became the first major Hollywood movie to use high resolution IMAX cameras for many of its scenes, giving audiences an even bigger and more realistic experience. Nolan wanted everything to look as real as possible, so he avoided using computer generated effects whenever he could. Instead, the team performed real stunts, including flipping an actual 18-wheel semi truck and blowing up a real factory for the movie. The marketing campaign for The Dark Knight was unlike anything people had seen before. Warner Brothers created a massive interactive viral campaign that got fans involved online and helped build excitement for the movie. At first, the campaign also helped answer criticism from people who thought Heath Ledger wasn't the right choice to play the Joker. Sadly, in January 2008, Ledger passed away because of an accidental prescription drug overdose. His death made people even more interested in seeing his performance, and the media gave the movie even more attention. When The Dark Knight finally hit theaters in July 2008, It received incredible reviews from both critics and audiences. People praised its darker and more mature story, amazing visuals, powerful action scenes, and especially Heath Ledger's unforgettable performance as the Joker. After his death, Ledger won many major awards, including the Academy Award, BAFTA Award, and Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actor. His performance also made The Dark Knight the first comic book movie ever to win major acting awards. The film broke countless box office records, became the highest grossing movie of 2008, became one of the highest grossing movies ever at that time, and also became the biggest superhero movie ever released during that period. Since its release, The Dark Knight has become one of the most respected superhero movies ever made. Many fans and critics believe it's not only one of the greatest superhero films of all time, but also one of the best movies released during the 2000s and one of the greatest films ever made. The movie completely changed how people looked at superhero films. Instead of feeling like a typical comic book movie, it played more like a serious crime thriller that just happened to feature Batman and other comic book characters. Because of its success, many filmmakers tried to copy its darker, more realistic style, although very few were able to match what Christopher Nolan accomplished. The movie has also been praised and studied for its deeper themes, including terrorism, justice, morality, and the difficult choices people have to make between doing what's right and what's necessary. In 2020, the United States Library of Congress selected The Dark Knight to be preserved in the National Film Registry because of its cultural, historical, and artistic importance. The story was finally completed with the release of The Dark Knight Rises in 2012, bringing Christopher Nolan's legendary Batman trilogy to an unforgettable ending. A group of six criminals pulls off a robbery at a mob owned bank in Gotham City. During the heist, they start turning on each other, killing one another because each person wants a bigger share of the money. They complain that the sixth member of the crew, a mysterious man known as the Joker, planned the whole robbery but didn't actually take part in it, so they believe he doesn't deserve any money. In the end, every robber is dead except the Joker. He reveals that he planned for them to wipe each other out, leaving all the cash for himself. After grabbing the money, he calmly escapes in a school bus. The Joker is a completely insane criminal mastermind who calls himself an agent of chaos. His only goal is to throw Gotham City into total madness and prove that anyone can lose control when pushed far enough. Later, Lieutenant Jim Gordon arrives at the robbed bank with Detective Anna Ramirez. They review the security camera footage, and Ramirez shows Gordon a clear picture of the Joker. Batman arrives at the crime scene to investigate. He notices that the stolen drug money had been secretly marked with radioactive material, making it easier to track wherever it goes. Gordon asks Batman if the Joker should now be their biggest concern. Batman replies that even though the Joker is dangerous, the entire mob organization is still a much larger threat, and bringing them down has to remain the top priority. Batman is actually billionaire Bruce Wayne, played by Christian Bale, after watching his parents get murdered during a mugging. When he was just a young boy, Bruce spent 7 years traveling the world, learning different fighting skills, and training himself mentally and physically. When he returned to Gotham, he became Batman, a masked vigilante who uses fear to strike terror into criminals. People across the city know him as the Dark Knight. At the same time, Gotham's new district attorney, Harvey Dent, played by Aaron Eckhart, has become known as the city's White Knight because of his fearless fight against organized crime. Lieutenant Jim Gordon, played by Gary Oldman, is one of the few honest cops in Gotham and secretly works alongside Batman. As night falls over Gotham, criminals are scared to even step outside because the bat signal shines across the sky. Gordon stands on the rooftop beside the signal with Detective Ramirez, waiting to see if Batman will show up. Ramirez asks if Batman is coming, but Gordon says it's okay if he doesn't. He hopes Batman is busy somewhere else stopping crime. Gordon also kindly asks Ramirez how her mother is doing since she is currently in the hospital. Meanwhile, in a parking garage, Dr. Jonathan Crane, also known as the Scarecrow, is secretly making a deal with members of the Russian mob led by the Chechen. Scarecrow is selling his terrifying fear toxin, the same chemical that causes people to see horrifying hallucinations. Suddenly, several regular citizens dressed in homemade Batman costumes crash the deal and start shooting at the criminals, hoping to become heroes themselves. Scarecrow quickly sprays one of the fake Batmen with his fear gas and points out that they are obviously not the real Batman because the real Batman would never use a gun. Just then, the Batmobile, also known as the Tumbler, comes crashing through a barricade. The powerful vehicle fires rockets into a nearby building, sending the mobsters running in panic. The real Batman jumps into the fight, bends one of the fake Batman's rifles with his bare hands, and knocks him unconscious to stop him from making things worse. The Chechen orders his aggressive Rottweilers to attack. Batman protects the fake heroes while fighting off the dogs, even though one of them bites deeply into his arm. During the chaos, Scarecrow jumps into a white van and tries to escape. Batman leaps onto the moving van and uses a cutting tool called the Mangler to slice into its side. Scarecrow swerves, causing Batman to fall off for a moment, but Batman quickly catches back up by jumping onto the roof of the van and smashing it to a stop. Batman leaves Scarecrow, the fake Batman, and several mobsters tied up together for the police to arrest later. When one of the fake Batmen says he was only trying to help, Batman firmly tells him that he doesn't need anyone else trying to be Batman. The next morning, Bruce Wayne stitches up the nasty dog bite on his arm. Alfred Pennyworth notices that Bruce has been secretly watching Gotham's new district attorney, Harvey Dent, through security cameras and computer screens. Bruce is trying to figure out if Dent can really be trusted. Alfred jokes that maybe Bruce isn't only watching Dent, maybe he's also spying on Rachel Dawes, who has started dating Harvey. At the courthouse, Harvey Dent joins Rachel Dawes as they prosecute mob boss Salvatore Maroni, who has taken over the Falcone crime family. During the trial, one of Maroni's men suddenly pulls out a gun and tries to shoot Dent right from the witness stand. Luckily, the gun jams and doesn't fire. Dent immediately punches the attacker before security drags him away. Even though the attack fails, there isn't enough evidence to keep Maroni locked up, and he walks free, leaving Dent frustrated. Later, Dent meets with Lieutenant Gordon. The two honest lawmen admit that they don't fully trust everyone working in each other's offices because corruption is everywhere in Gotham. Harvey tells Gordon that he wants to meet Batman someday. Gordon asks Dent to approve search warrants for five banks connected to the mob's money laundering operation. Dent agrees without hesitation, and the two begin building trust as partners in the fight against organized crime. Over at Wayne Enterprises, Lucius Fox attends a business meeting with Lau, the owner of Lau Security Investments from Hong Kong. Lau wants to make a major business deal with Wayne Enterprises, but after the meeting, Bruce tells Lucius that he doesn't trust Lau. The profits from Lau's company seem suspicious, and Bruce believes he's involved in illegal activities. They decide to cancel the deal. Bruce then asks Lucius to design a new bat suit that's lighter, faster, and flexible enough to let him turn his head more easily, especially after struggling while fighting those guard dogs. That evening, Harvey takes Rachel out for dinner at one of Gotham's most popular restaurants. Harvey proudly says he had to reserve the table weeks in advance and even used his influence to get it. By coincidence, Bruce Wayne arrives at the same restaurant with a famous Russian ballet dancer. Bruce spots Rachel and Harvey, then casually joins their table, revealing that he actually owns the restaurant. At first, Bruce seems jealous because Rachel is dating Harvey, but once Harvey explains how much he respects Batman and supports everything he's doing for Gotham, Bruce gains even more respect for him. Bruce then promises to host a huge fundraiser to help Harvey's political career. Bruce is impressed by Harvey's honesty and determination. Dent has been aggressively targeting every money launderer in Gotham, while Batman and Gordon continue attacking the mob's financial network. Bruce begins believing that Harvey could eventually become Gotham's true protector. If that happens, Bruce hopes he can finally stop being Batman and live a normal life with Rachel Dawes, his childhood friend, and one of the very few people who knows his secret identity. Even though Rachel is now in a relationship with Harvey, Bruce still has strong feelings for her. At the same time, Gotham's biggest crime bosses, including Sal Maroni, Gambol, and the Chechen, hold a video conference with Lau, who has fled to Hong Kong after secretly hiding all of the mob's money. Lau explains that Gordon and Dent raided every mob bank in Gotham, but he moved all the money before they could seize it. Since the cash is now safely hidden in Hong Kong, he believes American authorities can't touch it. Their meeting is suddenly interrupted by the Joker. He warns the mob that Batman isn't limited by the law and eventually he'll come after Lau too. Joker claims Lau will betray them the second he's arrested. He offers to kill Batman in exchange for half of the mob's money. The crime bosses laugh at him. Gambol stands up and threatens Joker, but Joker calmly opens his jacket, revealing several live grenades strapped to his body. Gambol puts a bounty on Joker's head. Before leaving, Joker tosses one of his Joker playing cards onto the table and tells them to call him when they're finally ready to get serious. He also warns them that Batman will eventually come for Lau. Not long afterward, Gambol is playing pool with his crew when one of his men claims the Joker has been killed and that they have his body. A body bag is brought into the room. Just as Gambol gets ready to pay the reward, the Joker suddenly jumps out of the bag alive. His men immediately point guns at Gambol's crew while Joker presses a knife against Gambol's face. Joker tells another disturbing story about how he got the scars on his cheeks, then brutally murders Gambol and takes control of his gang. Batman later meets with Gordon and Harvey Dent, promising that he'll bring Lau back from Hong Kong so he can testify against Gotham's mob leaders. Bruce Wayne had already been secretly investigating Lau's company under the excuse of a possible business takeover, but his real goal was to examine Lau's financial records. Lucius Fox shows Bruce his upgraded batsuit, and Bruce immediately starts planning a surprise trip to Hong Kong. Fox agrees to travel with him, so it looks like they're only there to officially cancel Wayne Enterprises' business deal with Lau. When Lucius arrives in Hong Kong, he meets Lau at his office building. Visitors aren't allowed to bring cell phones inside, so Fox leaves one at the front desk but secretly keeps another modified phone hidden in his pocket. During the meeting, he tells Lau that Wayne Enterprises is ending all negotiations with his company. The hidden phone secretly scans the building and creates a complete sonar map of the inside. After leaving, Fox intentionally doesn't pick up the phone he left at security, giving Batman everything he needs for the mission. That night, the abandoned phone sends out a powerful signal that shuts down the building's electricity. Batman crashes through Lau's office window, defeats his security guards in an intense fight, captures Lau, and escapes using a special extraction system. A giant balloon lifts them into the air, where a passing aircraft hooks onto the cable and pulls them safely away. Batman successfully brings Lau back to Gotham, where Harvey Dent uses Lau's testimony to arrest nearly the entire Gotham mob, dealing organized crime its biggest blow yet. Casting Christian Bale's return as Bruce Wayne and Batman represented the foundational element of the casting for The Dark Knight. Having established the character in Batman Begins, Bale brought continuity and depth that allowed the sequel to explore a more mature, burdened version of the hero. Nolan and the production team had selected Bale for the original film. After considering a range of actors, including Heath Ledger himself early in the Batman Begins process, as well as others such as Joshua Jackson, Ian Bailey, Hugh Dancy, Billy Crudup, Cillian Murphy, Henry Cavill, Jake Gyllenhaal, David Boreanaz, and David Duchovny. Bale stood out because he demonstrated the ability to embody both the light and dark aspects of the dual identity, capable of portraying the public playboy, Bruce Wayne, and the intense driven Batman with equal conviction. Writer David S. Goyer noted that while some candidates excelled at one side of the character, Bale could handle both. Nolan has described how Bale understood from the outset that a conventional performance would not work inside the restrictive batsuit. The actor needed to project massive energy and develop a distinct, gravelly voice to sell the visual presence of the costume. Bale had already begun experimenting with that voice before his screen test. For The Dark Knight, the preparation proved less physically grueling than for Batman Begins, when Bale had to rebuild his body after extreme weight loss for the machinist. This time he could focus on the character's evolution. A man who had found purpose, but now confronted the reality that his crusade attracted increasingly dangerous enemies and exacted a heavier personal toll. The improved batsuit design allowed more of Bale's cheesy fighting method training to be visible on screen, giving the action sequences greater clarity and physical authenticity compared to the deliberately obscured fights of the first film. Bale's commitment extended to the interrogation sequence with the Joker, where he absorbed Ledger's intensity and even dealt with real physical contact as Ledger egged him on to make the confrontation more visceral. The result was a performance that grounded the film's larger than life conflicts in psychological realism. Heath Ledger's casting as the Joker remains the most discussed and transformative decision in the film's production history. Nolan had met Ledger previously for other projects, including an early conversation about the role of Bruce Wayne for Batman Begins, which Ledger declined because he was uninterested in superhero material at that stage of his career. After the critical and commercial success of Batman Begins, Ledger actively pursued the Joker. Nolan and Ledger discussed the character before a full script existed, discovering they shared a vision of an anarchic, psychologically realistic figure rather than a cartoonish clown. Ledger described the Joker as a psychopathic, mass murdering, schizophrenic clown with zero empathy, deliberately avoiding any humanizing backstory that might soften the menace. He locked himself away for roughly a month in a London hotel room, keeping a diary, experimenting with voices, and studying influences such as the ventriloquist dummy style of speech and the chaotic energy of a clockwork orange. The announcement of Ledger's casting in 2006 provoked significant skepticism from the studio, some industry observers, the fan community, and even co writer Jonathan Nolan, who later admitted he did not initially understand the choice and that the reaction felt like the production was being pilloried for the worst casting decision ever. Warner Brothers. Executives expressed doubts, and public commentary questioned whether an actor known for Brokeback Mountain could embody the iconic villain previously defined by Jack Nicholson. Nolan remained firm, later describing how he saw in Ledger's eyes a determination to do something extraordinary with the part. Executive producer Charles Rowan confirmed that while other names were discussed in abstract terms, Ledger was the only actor with whom there was serious engagement. Ledger's process involved staying in character while in makeup and costume, generating an energy on set that elevated the performances around him. Christian Bale recalled the first scene they shot together, the interrogation, as setting the standard for the film, with Ledger fully immersed, absorbing punches, and creating dents in the walls from the physicality of the confrontation. Michael Caine observed that Ledger's Joker was a genuinely scary psychopath, distinct from Nicholson's more theatrical interpretation. Maggie Gyllenhaal praised Ledger's freedom and sense that he could do no wrong in the role. The performance ultimately earned Ledger a posthumous Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, validating Nolan's insistence against widespread doubt. Ledger's preparation and on-set intensity transformed the Joker from a familiar comic book antagonist into a force of pure chaos that redefined the possibilities for villains in the genre. Aaron Eckhart's selection as Harvey Dent. Later, Two-Face filled the need for an actor who could project an all-American heroic presence while carrying an undercurrent of anger or darkness. Nolan compared the ideal candidate to a Robert Redford type with deeper layers of potential volatility. Several actors were considered or approached, including Josh Lucas, Ryan Phillip, Mark Ruffalo, and Matt Damon. Damon was unable to commit due to scheduling conflicts. Eckhart brought the necessary charisma and moral complexity, portraying Dent as Gotham's White Knight District Attorney, whose idealism and personal losses drive a tragic transformation. His performance required balancing the upright public figure with the simmering intensity that would later explode into Two-Face's vengeful duality. Eckhart's casting allowed the film to explore themes of justice, corruption, and the fragility of order without reducing Dent to a simple foil for Batman. The character's arc intersects with Batman's own ethical boundaries, and Eckhart's grounded approach made the fall from grace feel earned rather than abrupt. On set, Eckhart worked alongside Ledger and Bale in scenes that tested the moral center of the narrative, contributing to the film's examination of how chaos can corrupt even the most principled individuals. The recasting of Rachel Dawes with Maggie Gyllenhaal addressed the absence of Katie Holmes, who had originated the role in Batman Begins but was unavailable for the sequel. Nolan expressed disappointment at Holmes' departure, yet moved forward with Gyllenhaal, whose performance brought a sharper intelligence and emotional weight to the character. Gyllenhaal's Rachel is less a traditional damsel and more an active participant in Gotham's legal and moral struggles, navigating relationships with both Bruce Wayne and Harvey Dent while confronting the city's escalating violence. Her chemistry with Bale differed from Holmes's, often described as more mature and conflicted, reflecting the characters' shared history and the pressures of their respective positions. Gyllenhaal has spoken of Ledger's presence as elevating the work of everyone around him, noting his absolute freedom in performance. The recasting also connected to earlier casting considerations. Jake Gyllenhaal, Maggie's brother, had been among the final contenders for Batman in Batman Begins, and Nolan had personally informed him of the decision to go with Bale. Maggie Gyllenhaal's arrival strengthened the ensemble's dramatic core, providing a credible emotional anchor amid the film's high stakes action and psychological warfare. Michael Caine's return as Alfred Pennyworth supplied the film's moral and paternal grounding. Caine had established the character in Batman Begins as Bruce Wayne's confidant, protector, and occasional voice of caution. His dry wit and understated wisdom provided necessary counterbalance to the escalating darkness. Caine publicly praised Ledger's interpretation of the Joker as surpassing Nicholson's in sheer psychological threat, describing it as the work of a lovely man who created a revelation of a scary psychopath. Alfred's scenes with Bruce allowed Bale to explore the personal cost of the Batman persona, and Kane's presence ensured continuity of the surrogate father son dynamic that humanized the billionaire vigilante. The actor's experience and timing made Alfred a reliable source of both exposition and emotional truth without ever feeling didactic. Gary Oldman's continuation as Lieutenant, later Commissioner, James Gordon anchored the police perspective within Gotham's crumbling institutions. Oldman had been considered for villain roles in earlier Batman projects, but found his ideal fit as the weary principal detective who becomes Batman's most trusted ally inside the system. His performance emphasized quiet competence and moral clarity rather than flashy heroics, making Gordon a believable partner in the fight against organized crime and the Joker's chaos. Oldman's understated intensity complemented Bale's more explosive energy and Ledger's theatrical menace. The character's family life, including scenes with Melinda McGraw as Barbara Gordon and Nathan Gamble as young James Gordon Jr., added domestic stakes that underscored the personal risks faced by those who stand against Gotham's darkness. Oldman's ability to convey exhaustion and resolve in equal measure helped the film portray law enforcement as both fallible and essential. Morgan Freeman's reprise of Lucius Fox brought technological expertise and ethical questioning to Wayne Enterprises. Freeman's calm authority and measured delivery made Fox a figure of quiet competence who enables Batman's gadgets while raising pointed questions about surveillance and moral boundaries. The character scenes with Bale explored the practical and philosophical limits of the Batman identity, particularly around the cell phone sonar technology used to track the Joker. Freeman's presence lent gravitas to the corporate and scientific elements of the story, grounding the high tech aspects in human judgment. Cillian Murphy's return as Dr. Jonathan Crane's Scarecrow provided a through line of psychological terror from Batman Begins into The Dark Knight. Murphy had originally screen tested for Batman and impressed Nolan enough that the director insisted on casting him as Scarecrow after deciding Bale was the right choice for the lead. Nolan later reflected that both he and Murphy understood from early conversations that Murphy would not play Batman, yet the elaborate screen tests on 35mm film generated such excitement that the studio accepted the Scarecrow casting without dissent. Previous Batman villains had often been played by major movie stars. Murphy's selection represented a different approach, prioritizing intensity and suitability over pure star power. In The Dark Knight, Scarecrow appears in a brief but memorable courtroom and later street sequence, reinforcing the persistence of fear based crime even as the Joker escalates the threat level. Murphy's continued involvement across the trilogy demonstrated Nolan's preference for actors who could inhabit the world consistently rather than rotating high profile cameos. Supporting antagonists filled out the criminal underworld with distinctive presence. Chin Han portrayed Lau, the Chinese accountant and money launderer, whose extradition becomes a pivotal plot point. Eric Roberts played Salvatore Maroni, the mob boss who survives an assassination attempt and later contributes to Harvey Dent's downfall. Richie Coster appeared as the Chechen, another crime lord entangled in the Joker schemes. Michael J. White took the role of Gambol, the gangster who underestimates the Joker with fatal results. These performances collectively depicted a fractured, opportunistic criminal hierarchy ripe for disruption by an agent of pure chaos. William Fichtner delivered a memorable turn as the bank manager in the opening heist, bringing tension and dry humor to the sequence that introduces the Joker's methods. Nestor Carbonell played Mayor Anthony Garcia, representing the political establishment under siege. Anthony Michael Hall appeared as the television reporter Mike Engel, whose broadcasts amplify the public's fear and the Joker's media manipulation. Joshua Hatto portrayed Coleman Reese, the Wayne Enterprises employee who threatens to expose Batman's identity. Monique Gabriela Kernan played Detective Anna Ramirez, whose compromised loyalty has lasting consequences. Ron Dean appeared as Detective Wirtz. Another corrupt officer, Colin McFarlane, returned as Commissioner Loeb. These roles, though smaller in screen time, populated Gotham with a network of ambition, corruption, and vulnerability that made the city's collapse feel systemic rather than isolated. Additional cast members contributed texture and authenticity. Melinda McGraw and Nathan Gamble portrayed Gordon's wife and son. Humanizing the commissioner, Beatrice Rosen appeared as Natasha, one of Bruce Wayne's social companions. Edison Chen played an LSI executive. David Dastmalchian secured a role as one of the Joker's thugs after a circuitous path involving local Chicago theater, a commercial audition, and persistence that eventually led to a call from the production. His face is visible rather than masked, giving the henchman individuality. Keith Sarabaka played Detective Stevens. Various officers, thugs, party guests, judges, and ferry passengers, played by actors including Patrick Leahy in a cameo as a gentleman at a party, filled the frame with the sense of a living city under pressure. The production drew on Chicago locations and local talent for many of these parts, enhancing realism. Nolan's overall casting approach favored discussions and targeted meetings over traditional open casting calls for principal roles. Many key actors, including the returning ensemble, came from prior relationships or specific creative conversations rather than large scale auditions. The process prioritized actors capable of treating the material as serious drama rather than genre pastiche. This philosophy extended to the decision to cast Ledger, despite external resistance, trusting the actor's ability to reinterpret an iconic figure without relying on previous portrayals. The ensemble's collective strength allowed the film to balance spectacular set pieces with intimate character moments, creating a denser dramatic texture than typical superhero fare of the era. Each casting choice reinforced the film's commitment to psychological depth, moral ambiguity, and the idea that Gotham's fate depended as much on the integrity of individuals as on physical confrontations. The resulting company of actors delivered performances that elevated the material, making the casting itself a defining element of the film's lasting impact. Production development and pre production. When Warner Bros. Pictures looked at the numbers coming out of Batman Begins in 2005, the decision to greenlight a follow up was hardly a difficult one. The studio had watched the Batman franchise limp through the late 1990s under the weight of Batman and Robin, and Christopher Nolan's grounded reboot had proven that audiences were hungry for a version of the character stripped of neon and camp. A sequel became a priority almost immediately, even though the film that would eventually become The Dark Knight was, in the beginning, little more than a suggestion sitting at the edge of the frame. That suggestion arrived in the closing minutes of Batman Begins, when Lieutenant Gordon hands Bruce Wayne a photograph of a calling card left behind by a criminal escalating in ambition. a Joker playing card. It was a tease, nothing more, and Nolan himself was not convinced at the time that he would ever get the chance to follow up on it. He had not set out to build a franchise, and he was genuinely unsure whether Batman Begins would perform well enough to justify a second installment. Still, conversations about where the story could go next began even before the camera stopped rolling on the first film, largely between Nolan and his co writer on Batman Begins, David Goyer. Goyer sketched out a rough shape for two possible sequels during that period. But Nolan wrestled with a harder question: how to keep expanding a world he had deliberately built on restraint and realism without breaking the internal logic he had worked so hard to establish. What he did know was that he wanted to use the Joker, and he wanted to use him in a way that honored the tone he and Goyer had fought to create the first time around. Formal talks between Nolan and Warner Brothers picked up not long after Batman Begins hit theaters. But real development did not begin in earnest until after Nolan wrapped his next project, the magician drama The Prestige, in 2006. Once that film was behind him, Nolan and Goyer spent roughly 3 months in a room together, hammering out the architecture of the new story. Their central preoccupation was the idea of escalation, the notion that Batman's presence in Gotham, meant to suppress crime, would instead provoke an equal and opposite reaction from the criminal underworld. If a costumed vigilante with military grade gadgets could operate outside the law to fight street thugs, what kind of adversary would that invite? Their answer was a figure who used terror itself as a weapon. Someone drawn to the chaos Batman's escalating war on crime would inevitably create. In their eyes, the Joker playing card at the end of Batman Begins wasn't just a cliffhanger. It was meant to expose the flaw in Bruce Wayne's assumption that his mission could ever be temporary. Interestingly, neither Goyer nor Nolan wanted to lean into overt political commentary, even though the shadow of the war on terror and the security measures the US government had put in place since 2001 hung over everything they were writing. They avoided making explicit parallels on purpose, believing that anything too didactic would cheapen the story and pull focus from the characters. Their intention instead was to write something that would resonate with the anxieties of the moment without being a thinly veiled editorial. Nolan later described the film as an expression of his own unease about anarchy, and he characterized the Joker as a figure whose only real desire is to tear down everything around him. Goyer had grown up admiring Tim Burton's 1989 Batman, and he respected Jack Nicholson's take on the character, but he never found that version frightening. What he wanted instead was a Joker who felt fully formed and unknowable from the moment he appeared on screen. A character without an origin story to explain him away, something closer to the shark in Jaws, menacing precisely because its motivations remain opaque. Nolan agreed. Both men made a conscious decision to withhold any clear backstory or arc for the character, believing that ambiguity was what made him dangerous. Nolan would later refer to the film, only half jokingly, as depicting the rise of the Joker. Their reasoning extended beyond this particular villain. They felt that other iconic movie antagonists, Hannibal Lecter and Darth Vader among them, had lost some of their power. Once later, film spelled out where they came from. With the broad strokes in place, the job of turning the outline into an actual script fell largely to Nolan's brother, Jonathan Nolan, who spent about 6 months developing it into a full draft. After that draft went to Warner Brothers, Jonathan kept refining it on his own for another 2 months, while Christopher was still tied up finishing The Prestige. Once Christopher was free, the two brothers spent roughly 6 more months together, polishing the script during pre production. Jonathan later said the ending was the part of the screenplay he found most compelling. Batman fleeing from the police he had, until recently, been working alongside. That sequence had always existed in some form, but it originally had Batman leaping across rooftops rather than escaping on the Batpod, and the change came relatively late in the process. So did the film's most quoted line of dialogue, the observation that a man either dies a hero or lives long enough to watch himself become the villain, which Jonathan considered the thematic key to the whole script. The brothers drew inspiration less from other superhero films than from crime dramas, citing The Godfather and Michael Mann's Heat as touchstones, and their finished screenplay leaned harder into the structure of a crime saga than a conventional comic book adventure, while still carrying forward the tone Nolan had established in Batman Begins. On the comic side, the writers drew heavily from Frank Miller's work of the 1980s, admiring the seriousness with which it treated its characters, and from Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale's Batman, The Long Halloween, a miniseries that explores the intertwined fates of Batman, Harvey Dent, and Jim Gordon. That last influence shaped one of the more surprising decisions in the script. Harvey Dent, not Batman, was conceived as the story's true central character. Dent sits at the crossroads of the film's central conflict. Batman believes Dent can be the legitimate hero Gotham actually needs, while the Joker is determined to prove that even Gotham's most incorruptible symbol can be broken. Nolan has said the title refers as much to Dent as it does to Batman, and he saw in Dent a kind of duality that mirrored Batman's own. One that offered rich dramatic territory to explore because so much narrative weight was placed on Dent's transformation. Bruce Wayne was written somewhat unusually for a title character as a man who does not change a great deal over the course of the film. Nolan, meanwhile, has said that of everything in the script, writing the Joker came easiest to him. He and Jonathan studied the character's various incarnations across decades of comics and found a through line connecting most of them, while also drawing on the villainous Dr. Mabius from Fritz Lang's German, silent and early sound films. A criminal mastermind who manipulates society from the shadows. Alan Moore's The Killing Joke, a graphic novel that toys with the idea that anyone can be pushed to madness given a sufficiently bad day, did not directly shape the plot, but Nolan has credited Moore's interpretation of the character with helping him find a reason for the Joker to exist at all, despite writing him as someone who is, at his core, without any coherent motive. Their Joker was conceived as a pure embodiment of anarchy, a psychopath unmoved by reason, logic, or fear, whose entire function in the story is to test how far Batman, Dent, and Gordon can be pushed before their principles crack. Amusingly, the Nolan brothers later realized that, without intending to, they had landed on a portrayal fairly close to the character's very first comic book appearance back in 1940. The film's final scene, in which the Joker tells Batman the two of them are fated to fight one another forever, wasn't written as a sequel tease. It was meant to underline that the two men were locked in a stalemate precisely because neither one was willing to kill the other. Christian Bale, reflecting on how his performance had shifted since Batman Begins, described his character's journey from an angry young man still searching for purpose to a hero worn down by the growing realization that his war against crime might never actually end. Because the new Batsuit gave him a much wider range of motion, Bale didn't need to bulk up to the same degree he had for the first film. That mattered for the fight choreography too. In Batman Begins, Nolan had deliberately shot combat in a chaotic, hard to follow style meant to convey the perspective of frightened criminals suddenly facing something they didn't understand. With the more flexible suit this time around, Nolan was able to let more of Bale's Kesey fighting method training show on screen. Casting the Joker was always going to invite comparisons to Nicholson's beloved performance, and Nolan wanted someone who could withstand that scrutiny without flinching. When Heath Ledger's casting was announced in August 2006, it drew a wave of skepticism from both industry figures and members of the public who doubted the actor, known at that point mostly for dramatic and romantic roles, could pull off such a menacing villain. Producer Charles Rowan pushed back on the criticism, saying Ledger had genuinely been the only actor seriously considered for the part, and that the goodwill Batman Begins had generated would help ease any lingering doubts. Nolan, for his part, said he never had reservations because his conversations with Ledger before casting had shown the two of them were already on the same page about who this Joker should be. Ledger admitted he felt some nerves about stepping into a role so thoroughly identified with Nicholson, but said the challenge was ultimately what drew him to it. He described his approach as building a psychopathic, mass murdering, schizophrenic clown utterly devoid of empathy, and he was careful never to make the character sympathetic or explicable. His influences ranged from Malcolm McDowell's Droog Alex in A Clockwork Orange to the anarchic energy of punk musicians Johnny Rotten and Sid Vicious. To prepare, Ledger spent roughly a month alone in a hotel room absorbing Joker comics, and he worked out the character's voice by blending high and low registers, a technique he adapted from ventriloquism. His physicality in fight scenes was designed to look unpredictable and improvised rather than choreographed. Over about 4 months, he assembled what came to be known as his Joker Diary, a collection of images and ideas meant to feed the character's worldview, including material as unsettling as finding humor in the AIDS epidemic. Ledger later described the process as the most fun he'd ever had playing a character, while also acknowledging how physically and mentally draining it was, some days leaving him too exhausted to move or speak. In an interview given in November 2007, he admitted that fully committing to a role like this made it difficult for him to sleep, and that during filming, he was often getting by on only a couple of hours a night. For Harvey Dent, Nolan wanted an actor who projected an old fashioned, all American heroism, something he compared to Robert Redford, but shaded with a hint of anger simmering underneath. Josh Lucas, Ryan Philippe, and Mark Ruffalo were all considered for the role at various points, and Matt Damon was reportedly interested but couldn't fit it into his schedule. Ultimately, the part went to Aaron Eckhart, whom Nolan felt had exactly the right blend of charm and the sense of a fundamentally good man being pushed toward his breaking point. Eckhart found the character's contradictions compelling, noting that what separates Dent from Batman isn't really their goals so much as how far each is willing to go to achieve them, and that even after Dent's fall from grace, he continues fighting crime, just without any of the restraint the law once demanded of him. Eckhart drew inspiration from the Kennedy family, and Robert F. Kennedy in particular, whose crusade against organized crime carried a similarly idealistic conviction in the power of the law. When it came time to figure out how Dent's transformation into Two Face should look, Eckhart and Nolan agreed on one thing early. They wanted nothing to do with Tommy Lee Jones's campy, pink haired, two tone suit version from 1995's Batman Forever. Instead, they aimed for something more restrained and plausible, a slightly charred, neutral colored suit rather than a costume shop villain. Gary Oldman, reprising his role as Lieutenant Gordon, described the character as the film's moral anchor, an honest cop wrestling with just how far his own principles can bend before they break entirely. Behind the scenes, Maggie Gyllenhaal stepped into the role of Rachel Dawes after Katie Holmes, who had played the character in Batman Begins, opted instead to appear in the comedy Mad Money. Gyllenhaal approached the part fresh, without trying to echo anything Holmes had done previously. Nolan saw Rachel primarily as the emotional bridge connecting Wayne and Dent, and ultimately as another loss that would deepen Wayne's isolation. And Gyllenhaal worked closely with him to make sure the character carried real weight, despite her relatively limited screen time. Beyond the film's central quartet, a wide supporting ensemble filled out Gotham's underworld and its police department. Eric Roberts, Michael Jai White, and Richie Coster played rival crime bosses Sal Maroni, Gamble, and the character known simply as the Chechen, while Chin Han portrayed Lau, the crime family's Hong Kong based accountant. On the police side, Colin McFarlane played Commissioner Gillian Loeb, Keith Sarabajka, and Ron Dean appeared as Detective Stevens and Woods, and Monique Gabriela Kernan played rookie detective Anna Ramirez. Joshua Joe Hatto took the role of Coleman Reese, the Wayne Enterprises employee who threatens to expose Batman's secret identity, and Anthony Michael Hall played television newsman. Mike Engel, Nestor Carbonell appeared as Gotham's mayor. Anthony Garcia and William Fichtner had a brief but memorable turn as a bank manager in the film's opening heist. The cast also included Melinda McGraw, Nathan Gamble, and Hannah Gunn as Gordon's wife and children, and David Dastmalchian as Thomas Schiff, one of the Joker's more unstable henchmen. Cillian Murphy made a brief cameo reprising his scarecrow role from Batman Begins, and US Senator Patrick Leahy, a self described lifelong Batman fan who had appeared in Batman media before, turned up in a small cameo role as well. A handful of other casting notes round out the pre production period. Musician Dwight Yoakam turned down the chance to play either the bank manager or a corrupt police officer because he was in the studio finishing his album, Dwight Sings Buck. Hong Kong actor Edison Chen had filmed a role in the movie, but most of his footage ended up on the cutting room floor following the fallout from a sex photo scandal that engulfed him around the time of the film's release. Location scouting for Gotham City took the production across the United Kingdom in October 2006, with visits to Liverpool, Glasgow, London, and parts of Yorkshire, alongside several American cities under consideration. Nolan ultimately settled on Chicago, partly because he liked the city itself and partly because its architecture offered a distinctive visual identity without being as instantly recognizable to audiences as, say, New York. Chicago city government had already proven cooperative during the filming of Batman Begins, shutting down stretches of road, bridges, and freeways to accommodate the production, which made a return trip an easy call. Creatively, Nolan wanted to move away from the more natural, remote settings of Batman Begins, places like Himalayan mountainsides and underground caverns, towards something more urban and structured, a city environment the Joker could methodically dismantle. Production designer Nathan Crowley pointed to the clean geometric lines of Chicago's skyline as a perfect fit for the film's crime drama sensibility. And the production leaned into the conceit that Batman's presence had, in some sense, helped the city improve. With Wayne Manor destroyed at the end of Batman Begins, the filmmakers also saw an opportunity to relocate Bruce Wayne to a sparse modern penthouse that better reflected his isolation. Some interiors were still built as physical sets, including the Bat Bunker, the underground successor to the Bat Cave, situated on the edge of the city. The production team briefly considered tucking it into the penthouse's basement before deciding that setup would strain believability too far. Most of the film was shot using Panavision's Panaflex, Millennium XL, and Platinum cameras, but Nolan was determined to capture roughly 40 minutes of footage using IMAX cameras, a high resolution format that relies on 70 mm film rather than the standard 35 mm stock. In the finished cut, IMAX footage makes up somewhere between 15 and 20% of the runtime, amounting to about 28 minutes. This made The Dark Knight the first major studio film to use IMAX cameras for principal photography of dramatic scenes, since the format had previously been reserved almost exclusively for documentaries. Warner Brothers was initially hesitant to sign off on the approach. The cameras themselves were bulky and difficult to maneuver, and both purchasing and processing the film stock could cost up to 4 times as much as standard 35 mm. Nolan's argument was straightforward. If the equipment could function on Mount Everest, it could function on a film set. And cinematographer Wally Pfister and his camera crew began training with the IMAX cameras in January 2007 to prove the format was workable. Nolan was especially keen to shoot the opening Bankhead sequence in IMAX, believing it would immediately signal to audiences that this sequel operated on a bigger visual scale than its predecessor. Filming principal photography began on April 18, 2007, in Chicago on a budget of $185 million. For the film's look, Pfister decided to merge the rust-toned palette that had defined Batman Begins with the cooler, dusk-like color scheme, cobalt blues, deep greens, blacks, and whites he had developed for the Prestige, partly as a corrective to complaints that Batman Begins had, in places, been too dark to read clearly. To keep the production's identity under wraps during location shoots, the Chicago portion of filming operated under the deliberately misleading working title Rory's First Kiss, though local media quickly figured out what was actually being filmed. Ledger himself largely directed and filmed the Joker's unsettling homemade hostage videos that appear throughout the movie. Michael Caine later admitted that during the filming of one of those videos, Ledger's performance was so unnervingly good that Caine forgot his own lines. The very first scene shot was the bank heist prologue, filmed over 5 days inside the old Chicago main post office. Scheduling it first served a practical purpose. It let the production test out the IMAX workflow early, with enough runway to reshoot on conventional cameras if the process proved unworkable. And it also gave Warner Bros. A self contained sequence they could release early as part of the marketing push. Pfister described that week as an exercise in patience, since IMAX footage took roughly 4 days to come back from processing before anyone could see what they'd actually captured. From there, the production moved to England for most of May before returning to Chicago in June. Several downtown Chicago buildings doubled for Gotham locations. The lobby of one Illinois center stood in for Bruce Wayne's penthouse, with custom built bookcases used to conceal the elevators, while a floor of 2 Illinois Center was dressed for Wayne's fundraising gala, the scene marking the first encounter between Batman and the Joker, which crew members recalled as a genuinely exciting one to shoot. In both locations, the windows were covered with green screen material so that Gotham's skyline could be composited in during post production. July brought 3 weeks of filming for the elaborate truck chase sequence, much of it along Wacker Drive, a layered downtown street that had to be closed to traffic overnight for the shoot. Partway through, Nolan added an additional set piece, a SWAT van smashing through a concrete barricade that hadn't originally been planned. The chase continued onto LaSalle Street, which also served as the location for the GCPD's funeral procession, and hosted a practical stunt in which a full size 18-wheeler truck was flipped end over end alongside a helicopter sequence. Additional footage was captured on Monroe Street, Randolph Street, and at Randolph Street Station. Navy Pier on the shore of Lake Michigan became Gotham Harbor for the film's climactic ferry sequence. Location scouts spent more than a month trying to find actual vessels suitable for the scene and came up empty. So the construction team ended up building full ferry facades on top of barges instead. The entire sequence, one of the film's most logistically demanding, was shot in a single day and required roughly 800 extras who were cycled through hair, makeup, and wardrobe in staggered shifts to keep the production moving. The exterior of the fictional Gotham Provide building, the site of Batman and the Joker's final confrontation, was filmed at the still under construction Trump International Hotel and Tower. The building's owners refused to allow a stunt involving Batman suspending a SWAT team from the structure, so that shot was relocated to the 40th floor of a different building site instead. A former Brax candy factory on Cicero Avenue, already slated for demolition, was used in August 2007 to film the destruction of Gotham General Hospital. Filming in Chicago wrapped on September 1, closing out with scenes of Bruce Wayne driving and then crashing his car before the production headed back to England. Beyond the sequences already mentioned, the finished film draws on a wide range of additional Chicago locations. Lake Michigan doubles as the Caribbean Sea in the scene where Wayne boards a seaplane. The Richard J. Daley Center supplied both the exterior of Wayne Enterprises and a courtroom interior. The Berghoff restaurant appears in the scene where GCPD officers arrest members of the mob, and additional Chicago spots used during the shoot include the Twin Anchors restaurant, the Sound Bar, McCormick Place, which stood in for Wayne Enterprises interior, and the Chicago Theater. The high rise at 330 North Wabash provided office spaces for Dent, Mayor Garcia, and Commissioner Loeb, and its 13th floor doubled as the Wayne Enterprises boardroom. Pfister made the most of the building's expansive windows and natural light by adding an 80-foot glass table along with reflective lighting fixtures. A parking garage on Randolph Street was used for the scene in which Batman apprehends both Scarecrow and a group of Batman costumed vigilante impersonators. A scene Nolan wanted populated with several Rottweilers, though finding a single handler capable of managing multiple dogs at once proved surprisingly difficult. A rooftop shot of Batman surveying the city was filmed atop Willis Tower, Chicago's tallest skyscraper. A stuntman had originally been slated to perform the sequence in Bale's place, but Bale successfully lobbied to do it himself. All told, the 13 weeks the production spent filming in Chicago were estimated to have pumped around $45 million into the local economy and generated thousands of jobs for the city. A significant portion of the film's interiors were built on sound stages back in the United Kingdom, primarily at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire and inside a hangar at Cardington Airfield in Bedfordshire. The Bat Bunker set alone took 6 weeks to construct inside the Cardington hangar. Its design drew on 1960s era Chicago architecture and it was built directly onto the hangar's existing concrete floor, using a 200-foot long, 8-foot tall ceiling to give the space a sweeping, expansive feel. Because the 160-foot tall hangar itself wasn't structurally suited to supporting the bunker's roof from above, the crew built a surrounding gantry system to hold both the roof and the lighting rigs in place. After the production returned to the UK in May, additional scenes were filmed at the Criterion restaurant, the setting for a dinner shared by Rachel, Dent, and Wayne, and at the University of Westminster, which stood in for a Gotham newsroom. The GCPD headquarters was reconstructed inside the Farmillo building. During the interrogation room confrontation between Batman and the Joker, Ledger reportedly asked Bale to actually hit him for realism. Bale declined, but Ledger nonetheless threw himself against the set walls hard enough to leave visible dents and cracks. Filming resumed in England again in mid September for interior work on the Ferry Hospital and Gotham Pruitt building sequences. By mid October, both interior and exterior scenes depicting Rachel held hostage among barrels of gasoline were shot at Battersea Power Station. Because the power station is a protected listed building, the crew built a false wall in front of it, lined with explosives, to avoid damaging the actual structure, a precaution that didn't stop nearby residents from calling emergency services when the blast went off, fearing an actual terrorist attack was underway. English filming concluded at the end of October with a batch of green screen shots supporting the truck chase sequence, along with footage of Rachel being thrown from a window, filmed on a set at Cardington. The production's final leg took it to Hong Kong for 9 days, capturing aerial footage from the top of the International Finance Center, as well as shots at the central mid-levels escalator, the center, the Central District generally, the Peninsula Hong Kong, and Queen's Road, along with a stunt sequence involving Batman catching an in-flight C-130 aircraft. Despite extensive rehearsals of a stuntman leaping from Chicago's McClurg building in preparation, a planned stunt showing Batman jumping between two Hong Kong skyscrapers was scrapped after local authorities denied the permits needed for helicopter use during filming. Pfister later called the permitting process a nightmare to navigate. Nolan pushed back on reports suggesting a scene of Batman diving into Victoria Harbour had been cut over pollution concerns, insisting the change had simply been a script decision rather than a practical one. The overall 127-day shoot wrapped on November 15, finishing on schedule and under budget. Post production editing was already underway in January 2008 when Heath Ledger, then 28, died from an accidental overdose of prescription medication. In the aftermath, rumors circulated suggesting his total immersion in the Joker role had somehow contributed to his death or destabilized his mental state. Those claims were later refuted. Nolan later reflected on how emotionally difficult the editing process became in the immediate wake of Ledger's death, describing the strange experience of having to sit with his performance every day in the edit bay while grieving him. Though he also said he felt fortunate to have meaningful work to focus on, work Ledger himself had been proud of and had entrusted to Nolan to finish, because Nolan strongly prefers using sound captured live on set rather than re recording dialogue afterward in post production. All of Ledger's actual performance work had been locked in before he died, and Nolan chose not to alter the Joker's arc or dialogue in response to the tragedy. The finished film carries a dedication to both Ledger and to stuntman Conway Wycliffe, who died during rehearsals for a stunt involving the Tumbler, the film's version of the Batmobile, working alongside lead editor Lee Smith. Nolan took what has been described as an unusually aggressive approach to trimming the film down to its final 152-minute runtime. He has said that in the end, no scenes were cut from the finished picture because unnecessary material had already been removed at the script stage before filming began, and everything that remained felt essential to him. Getting the script to that point wasn't easy, though the Nolan brothers went through a period where they trimmed so aggressively that the story started to lose coherence, forcing them to add scenes back in to restore clarity. Because Batman Begins had been constrained by the need to establish core Batman iconography for audiences, and because that film's success had already earned the character's world a degree of trust from viewers, The Dark Knight gave its design team considerably more creative latitude. Special effects supervisor Chris Corball oversaw roughly 700 visual effects shots produced by the effects houses Double Negative and Frame Store, a comparatively modest number for a film of this scale, reflecting Nolan's preference for practical effects wherever they were feasible, reserving computer generated imagery for situations where practical solutions simply wouldn't work. Production designer Nathan Crowley designed the Batpod, the film's new motorcycle like vehicle, specifically because Nolan didn't want to lean too heavily on repeat appearances of the Tumbler. Corbell's team built the actual working Batpod based on a prototype that Crowley and Nolan had cobbled together themselves by combining parts from various commercial vehicles. The finished machine was so wide and unwieldy that only one stuntman, Jean Pierre Goy, could ride it, and only after months of dedicated training. The explosive destruction of Gotham General Hospital wasn't originally scripted. It was added during filming. Once Corbold became convinced the effect could actually be pulled off, costume and makeup designers Lindy Hemming and Nathan Crowley, working with Jamie Rama, redesigned the batsuit to improve both comfort and mobility, building a suit out of stretchable material layered with more than 100 individual pieces of urethane armor. Sculptor Julian Murray developed the design for Dent's burnt facial prosthetics, working from Nolan's request for something with a skeletal quality. Murray moved through several early versions that were judged too realistic and genuinely horrifying before landing on something more stylized, detailed, but less viscerally repulsive. Hemming designed the Joker's overall look by drawing on contemporary fashion and music world aesthetics to give the character a modern, trend conscious edge, while also pulling from Francis Bacon's 1953 painting study after Velázquez's portrait of Pope Innocent X, a reference Nolan himself suggested, along with the character's various comic book looks over the decades. The finished costume settled on a purple coat, a green vest, a vintage style shirt, and a slim 1960s inflected tie that Ledger himself proposed. Prosthetic supervisor Connor O'Sullivan designed the character's facial scars, partly inspired by a scarred delivery man he had encountered in real life, applying his own technique to create a supple, convincingly skin like prosthetic. Makeup artist John Caglioni Jr. designed the Joker's grimy, lived in makeup to look as though it had been worn for days without being reapplied, an idea also partly influenced by Bacon's paintings. To achieve the cracked, textured effect seen on screen, Caglioni used a classic theatrical technique, having Ledger scrunch his face up tightly before the makeup was applied, so that once he relaxed, natural creases and fractures formed across the surface. Ledger insisted on applying his own lipstick for every take, considering it a core part of how he inhabited the character. Music composers James Newton Howard and Hans Zimmer, both returning from their work on Batman Begins, scored The Dark Knight together, a reunion Nolan pushed for because he wanted a clear musical thread connecting the two films. Recording took place at Air Studios in London. Unusually, both composers wrote much of their material before actually seeing finished footage. A deliberate choice on Nolan's part meant to let the score be shaped by the characters and story rather than by cues tied to specific images on screen. Howard and Zimmer divided the workload by character rather than by scene. Howard took the lead on Dent's music, while Zimmer handled the themes for Batman and the Joker. Zimmer was adamant that Batman's theme shouldn't sound conventionally heroic or super, reflecting his sense that the character wasn't a straightforwardly noble figure. Howard, meanwhile, wrote roughly 10 minutes of material for Dent, aiming to capture him first as a symbol of American hope before tracking his slide into emotional extremity and moral corruption. He used brass instrumentation for both ends of that arc, gradually distorting the sound as Dent's transformation into Two-Face progresses. For the Joker, Zimmer initially wanted to build the character's entire theme around a single sustained note, describing his goal as a sound that starts out mildly unsettling before escalating into serious aggravation and finally becoming almost unbearable by the end. He couldn't quite make that concept work in practice, so he settled instead on a two note structure with shifting, unpredictable tempos and a distinctly punk inflected edge. The theme took cues from the pioneering electronic group Kraftwerk, as well as from Zimmer's own past collaborations with the rock band The Damned. His broader goal was to capture the character's corrosive, reckless, almost otherworldly quality by blending orchestral and electronic elements, modifying nearly every recorded note afterward to evoke sounds like thunder or the scrape of a razor blade. At one point, he tried to develop original synthesized textures by asking his musicians to hold a single note and shift almost imperceptibly toward a second one over a full 3 minute span, an exercise the musicians reportedly found genuinely difficult since it ran directly against everything their formal training had taught them. Reaching the sound Zimmer was after took several months of experimentation. After Ledger's death, Zimmer briefly considered scrapping the unconventional theme in favor of something more traditional, but he and Howard ultimately agreed that keeping it intact was the right way to honor the performance Ledger had given. Released theatrical The Dark Knight's marketing campaign was built by 42 Entertainment, a company specializing in alternate reality games, and Nolan tasked the team with a fairly specific mission early on: neutralize the public skepticism surrounding Ledger's casting and carefully manage the moment audiences would first see him fully in character. Drawing inspiration from the screenplay itself, along with the comics, The Killing Joke, The Long Halloween, and Arkham Asylum, A Serious House on Serious Earth. 42 Entertainment structured the campaign as a series of escalating events spread across roughly a year, though Warner Brothers vetoed some of their more provocative ideas. Jokerized Santa Claus figures around Christmas. Coffins full of chattering wind up teeth for Mother's Day. A dark joke referencing Bruce Wayne's late mother, and actors dressed as Batman perched on rooftops, which raised obvious safety concerns. The campaign kicked off in May 2007 with a wave of I Believe in Harvey Dent posters supporting his fictional district attorney campaign, alongside Joker branded playing cards hidden inside comic books at stores across the US. Fans who found the cards were directed to a website where submitting an email address would reveal 1 pixel of a hidden image of the Joker. Fully unveiling the image required roughly 97 email submissions and about 20 hours, and the slow reveal was well received by fans following along. At that summer's San Diego Comic Con, 42 Entertainment distributed 11 $001 bills altered with Joker imagery and the phrase "Why so serious?" printed on them, each leading whoever found it to a specific real world location. An original plan to scatter the bills from a balcony above the crowd was scrapped for safety reasons, so they were quietly handed out to attendees instead. The event organizer expected a turnout in the low thousands. Instead, roughly 650,000 people showed up and took part in a range of activities, including calling in a phone number spotted on a banner towed behind a small plane, and in some cases, applying Joker style makeup themselves to stage disruptive stunts alongside hired actors. Around the world, fans were enlisted to photograph specific letters on public signage that, when assembled, spelled out a ransom note. A campaign aimed specifically at US audiences involved people tracking down Nokia branded phones. Nokia was one of the film's brand partners, hidden inside a cake, a scavenger hunt that ultimately led participants to an early screening of the bank heist prologue, months ahead of the film's actual release. Ledger's brief appearance in that footage was received enthusiastically and helped shift public conversation about his casting in a more positive direction. After Ledger died, the marketing campaign continued largely unchanged, though its focus increasingly shifted toward Harvey Dent's fictional election campaign, a storyline whose timing deliberately paralleled the real 2008 US presidential race. Warner Bros. Grew concerned that general audiences didn't know or care much about the Dent character specifically, so the campaign leaned harder into building his profile through additional signage, stickers, and branded Dentmobiles that toured American cities. The campaign wound down in July with displays of the bat signal projected over both Chicago and New York, which were then, in keeping with the fiction, shown as vandalized or defaced by the Joker. Industry observers widely regarded the overall campaign as one of the more inventive and effective marketing efforts of its era. Anti piracy planning consumed roughly 6 months of preparation from Warner Brothers, a reflection of just how costly film piracy had become. The industry as a whole had lost an estimated $6.1 billion to piracy in 2005 alone. The studio randomized the delivery routes used to ship physical film reels to theaters and required a documented chain of custody, tracking everyone who came into contact with a print. Some theaters equipped staff with night vision goggles specifically to spot anyone attempting to record the film during a screening, and at least one such attempt was caught in Kansas City. Warner Brothers considered the overall effort a success, pointing to the fact that the first low quality camcorder bootleg didn't surface online until somewhere between 38 and 48 hours after the film's earliest global release. In Australia, heading into its release, industry expectations for the broader 2008 box office were somewhat muted compared to 2007's $9.7 billion total, largely because the summer slate was crowded with comedies competing against one another, alongside a run of tonally darker films, The Dark Knight among them, arriving during a period marked by economic strain and general election year fatigue in the United States. Fewer sequels than usual were scheduled that year, even though sequels historically tended to perform reliably well. Only four films: The Dark Knight, The Chronicles of Narnia, Prince Caspian, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, and Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull were widely expected to reach true blockbuster status, with only the Indiana Jones sequel confidently projected to clear $300 million. Pre release buzz for The Dark Knight was strong, buoyed by enthusiastic reviews and a record setting $3.5 million in advance IMAX ticket sales. Analysts predicted its opening weekend would outperform Iron Man's $102 million debut earlier that same year, but fall short of Spider Man 3's 2007 record of $151.1 million. Some worried that the film's lengthy runtime would cap the number of daily screenings theaters could offer, and pointed to counter programming from the female skewing musical Mamma Mia and the family friendly Space Chimps as potential headwinds. There was also a lingering sense, based on box office history, that Batman films had a ceiling. The 1989 Tim Burton film remained, at that point, the highest grossing entry in the franchise. The film's premiere took place on July 14 at an IMAX theater in New York City, with a section of Broadway closed off for the event, which featured a live performance of the score by Howard and Zimmer. The Hollywood Reporter noted that Ledger received multiple standing ovations that night, and that at the after party, Warner Brothers executives found themselves navigating an unusual emotional balance between celebrating the film's reception and honoring Ledger's memory. The film opened wide across the US and Canada on July 18, 2008, in a record setting 4,366 theaters spread across roughly 9,200 screens. It earned $158.4 million over its opening weekend, translating to a per theater average of $36,282, surpassing Spider-Man 3's previous record and easily topping the box office ahead of Mamma Mia in its third weekend with $27.8 million and Hancock $14 million. It also set records for the highest single-day gross $67, 2 million on opening Friday, the highest Sunday gross $43.6 million, the biggest midnight opening $18.5 million from roughly 3,000 midnight screenings, and the largest IMAX opening $6, 3 million across about 94 IMAX locations, while posting the second highest Saturday gross on record $47.7 million, behind only Spider-Man 3, and helping push the overall weekend box office to an all-time high of $253, 6 million. The film also benefited from a wave of repeat viewings, particularly among younger moviegoers, and drew a fairly evenly split audience, 52% male. With roughly equal turnout from viewers under and over 25, the records kept falling in the weeks that followed. The Dark Knight posted the highest grossing opening week ever recorded at $238.6 million and set new benchmarks for cumulative grosses at the 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10-day marks, including the best non-holiday Monday, 24.5 million, and the best non-opening Tuesday, 29 million on record. along with the second best non-opening Wednesday, 18.4 million, trailing only Transformers $29.1 million. It held the number one spot in its second weekend with $75.2 million, ahead of the debuting comedy Step Brothers, 31 million, giving it the best second weekend performance ever at that point. It stayed on top through its third weekend, 42.7 million, and fourth, 26. 1 million before slipping to second place in its fifth weekend, earning $16.4 million behind the debut of Tropic Thunder, Dory 25.80 million. The film remained among the 10 highest grossing films in the country for 10 consecutive weeks, and it reached both the $400 million and $500 million domestic milestone faster than any film before it, 18 days and 45 days respectively. Even after its initial run had thinned out to fewer than 100 theaters, Warner Bros. Gave it a 300 theater relaunch in late January 2009, timed to Academy Award nomination season, which helped push its final domestic total to $533.3 million by the time it left theaters on March 5 after a 33-week run. That made it, at the time, the highest grossing comic book adaptation, the highest grossing superhero film, and the highest grossing Batman film ever released, as well as the top grossing film of 2008 overall, and the second highest grossing film in box office history up to that point, unadjusted for inflation, trailing only Titanic's $600.8 million. Internationally, the film opened in Australia and Taiwan on Wednesday, July 16, 2008, ahead of a wider rollout across 20 markets that weekend, earning roughly $40 million combined, enough to place it second behind Hancock's $44.8 million. Though Hancock was playing in nearly four times as many countries at that point. By the end of August, The Dark Knight had reached 62 countries worldwide, though Warner Brothers opted not to release it in China at all, citing a mix of unspecified pre release conditions and what it described as cultural sensitivities around some of the film's content. Its international total ultimately reached about $469.7 million, with its strongest overseas markets being the United Kingdom, 89.1 million, Australia, 39.9 million, Germany, 29.7 million, France 27.5 million, Mexico 25 million, South Korea 24.7 million, and Brazil 2 million, enough to make it the second highest grossing film of the year worldwide, behind Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. By January 2009, the film's worldwide total had climbed to $997 million, and a theatrical reissue time to that year's Oscar season pushed it past the $1 billion mark in February with a final worldwide tally of $1.003 billion. That achievement made it the first superhero film ever to cross $1 billion at the global box office, the top grossing film of 2008 worldwide, only the fourth film in history to reach 10 figures, and at the time, the fourth highest grossing film ever made, trailing Pirates of the Caribbean, Dead Man's Chest 1.066 billion, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King 1.119 billion, and Titanic 1.842 billion. As of June 2025, subsequent theatrical releases have nudged its cumulative worldwide total up further to $1.09 billion.